The first time anyone laughed at Dale Brenner's tractor, he was standing in the parking lot of a John Deere dealership in Hutchinson, Kansas. It was March 2019, cold, wet. The kind of morning where the wind cuts through your jacket and reminds you that spring planting is still 3 weeks away, no matter what the calendar says. Dale had driven his 1978 Massey Ferguson 4880 43 miles from his farm outside Nickerson, and he'd done it on the highway, not on a trailer, not behind a semi. He drove it, straight down Route 96, doing 38 miles per hour with the flashers on and a line of pickups stacked up behind him. The 4880 didn't have a cab anymore. The glass had been gone for years. The sheet metal was rust brown where the red paint had peeled off in hand-sized chunks. The front tires were mismatched. The exhaust stack was held on with baling wire and what looked like half a coffee can. When Dale pulled into the dealership lot and shut it down, 3 salesmen were standing outside the parts counter. One of them was holding a coffee cup. Another had a clipboard. All 3 of them were grinning. Dale climbed down off the fender. His boots hit the pavement. He walked toward the front door, and that's when he heard it. Laughter. Not loud, not mean. Just the kind of laughter that happens when someone sees something ridiculous and can't help themselves. Dale stopped, turned around, looked at the salesman with the clipboard. "You boys need something?" The clipboard guy shook his head, still smiling. "No, sir. Just admiring your ride." "I'm here to trade." The smile got wider. "Trade for what?" 8R. That's when the laughter stopped being polite. The salesman with the coffee cup actually choked a little. He coughed into his fist, set the cup down on the windowsill, and walked over. "Sir," he said, "we don't take trade-ins on that." Dale looked at him. "That's a 4880. I know what it is. V8 Perkins, 400 cubic inches, 6-speed power shift. I'm sure it was a fine machine in 1978. It's a fine machine now." The salesman glanced back at his coworkers. One of them was shaking his head. The clipboard guy had already gone inside. "Look," the salesman said, "I don't want to waste your time. We can't give you anything for that tractor. It's got no resale value, no cab, no front wheel assist, no guidance. That's scrap metal." Dale didn't move. "You haven't even looked at the engine." "Don't need to. You haven't checked the hours." "Doesn't matter. It's got 6,100 hours. The salesman blinked. "On a 78? Original engine. That's impossible." "It's not." The salesman shook his head, stepped back, pulled a card out of his shirt pocket and handed it to Dale. "Tell you what, you want to get rid of that thing, call the scrapyard in Lyons. They'll come get it. Maybe give you $800 for the iron." Dale looked at the card, looked at the salesman, then he looked past him toward the row of green 8R tractors lined up under the awning. 70-foot wingspans, LED light bars, leather seats. He put the card in his pocket. "Thanks for your time," Dale said. He walked back to the 4880, climbed up, cranked the key. The Perkins V8 fired on the first turn. No smoke, no hesitation, just a deep, rattling idle that shook the fenders and echoed off the dealership walls. Dale dropped it into third gear and rolled out of the lot. By the time he hit the highway, the salesmen were back inside. Dale Brenner was 61 years old, and he'd been farming the same 1,280 acres his entire life. Wheat, milo, soybeans in the bottom ground. His father had bought the place in 1964 with a loan from the Farmers State Bank and a handshake, and when his father died in 2003, Dale inherited the land, the debt, and a machine shed full of equipment that hadn't been updated since Reagan's second term. The 4880 had been his father's tractor. The old man bought it used in 1983 from a fertilizer dealer in Pretty Prairie who was going out of business. Paid $18,500 cash. Drove it home in a thunderstorm with no cab and no windshield and never complained once. Dale's father believed in 2 things: Perkins engines and paying your bills on time. He didn't believe in paint. He didn't believe in comfort. And he sure as hell didn't believe in trading iron every 3 years just because the dealer said you should. When Dale's father died, the 4880 had 4,780 hours on it, 20 years of spring tillage, 2 decades of wheat planting, and it had never missed a day. Dale kept using it. He didn't have a choice. He didn't have the cash for a new tractor, and he didn't have the credit for a loan. So he ran the 4880 through another 15 years of planting seasons, and every time something broke, he fixed it himself. The cab came off in 2011 when a low-hanging branch caught the roof and ripped the whole frame off the frame mounts. Dale thought about welding it back on, but the glass was already cracked, the air conditioning hadn't worked in a decade, and honestly, he didn't mind the wind. The paint came off because he didn't have time to care. And the hours, they just kept climbing. By 2019, Dale had put another 1,320 hours on the 4880. It was still running the original Perkins V8, still shifting through all 6 gears, still pulling a 12-row planter through heavy clay without bogging down. But Dale was tired of the looks, tired of the comments at the co-op, tired of watching his neighbors roll past his driveway in $400,000 machines while he sat on a tractor that looked like it had been dug out of a scrap pile. He wanted something newer, something with a cab, something that didn't make people laugh. So he drove to Hutchinson, and they laughed anyway. Dale didn't go home right away. He stopped at a fuel station outside Nickerson and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine idling. He thought about calling the scrapyard. He thought about posting the 4880 on Craigslist for $3,000 and seeing if anyone bit. Then he thought about his father. His father, who would have told him to stop whining and get back to work. His father, who would have said that a tractor is worth what it can do, not what it looks like. Dale pulled out his phone, opened Facebook, scrolled through his feed until he found the name he was looking for, Kurt Holloway. Kurt ran a diesel performance shop in McPherson. He built pulling tractors, modified combine engines, tuned semis for guys who wanted an extra 100 horsepower out of a Cummins or a Cat. And every year, Kurt hosted a Dyno day. Farmers, truckers, and tractor pullers would bring their machines to Kurt's shop, strap them down to a chassis dynamometer, and see what kind of power they were really making. It cost $50 for a pull. The results went up on a leaderboard. And at the end of the day, whoever had the highest horsepower number won a trophy and a case of oil. Dale had never entered. He'd never even considered it. But sitting in that fuel station parking lot, staring at the rust on his steering wheel and the baling wire holding his exhaust together, Dale made a decision. He was going to find out what that Perkins V8 was really worth. Kurt Holloway's Dyno Day was set for the first Saturday in April. Dale called ahead and reserved a spot. Kurt didn't ask what kind of tractor he was bringing, didn't ask for a year or model, just took Dale's name and told him to show up at 9 a.m. Dale spent the next 2 weeks getting the 4880 ready. He changed the oil, flushed the coolant, pulled the air filter, and blew it out with the compressor. He checked the injection pump timing with a dial indicator and a flashlight, adjusted it 2 degrees, and buttoned everything back up. He didn't fix the paint. He didn't replace the cab. He didn't even wash it. He just made sure the engine was right. On the morning of the Dyno Day, Dale loaded the 4880 onto his gooseneck trailer and hauled it to McPherson. When he pulled into Kurt's shop, there were already 15 machines in the parking lot. New tractors, old tractors, a couple of pulling tractors with chrome stacks and custom hoods. One guy had brought a Steiger Panther with duals on all 4 corners and a turbo the size of a basketball. Dale backed the 4880 off the trailer, and immediately he felt the eyes. A group of younger farmers standing near a Case IH Magnum stopped talking and stared. One of them nudged his buddy. Another one pulled out his phone and took a picture. Dale ignored them. He drove the 4880 over to the sign-in table where Kurt was standing with a clipboard. Kurt looked up, smiled. "Dale Brenner? That's me." Kurt walked around the 4880, looked at the engine, looked at the tires, looked at the exhaust stack held together with wire and a coffee can. "This is what you're running?" Dale nodded. "It is." Kurt scratched his jaw. "What's the rated horsepower on a 78 4880? "Factory spec says 267. "You done any work to it?" "Changed the oil last week." Kurt grinned. "All right, let's see what she's got." The dyno bay was a concrete slab with heavy steel rollers embedded in the floor. The tractor would drive onto the rollers, drop into gear, and run wide-open throttle while the dyno measured the torque and calculated the horsepower. It was loud. It was smoky. and it was the most honest test a machine could take. Dale's turn came up around 11:30. By then, the leaderboard had some serious numbers. The Steiger Panther had hit 612 horsepower. A modified John Deere 4440 with a turbo swap had posted 318. A Case IH 7140 Magnum had come in at 291. When Dale rolled the 4880 onto the dyno, the crowd had grown. Maybe 30 people. Farmers, mechanics, a couple of kids holding their father's hands, and they were all staring at the rustiest tractor in the parking lot. Kurt hooked up the load cell, checked the alignment, gave Dale a thumbs up through the open cab frame. "All right, Dale," Kurt shouted over the noise. "Wide open, hold it for 10 seconds. Dale dropped the clutch, shoved the throttle forward, and let the Perkins V8 scream. The dyno rollers spun. The engine roared. Black smoke poured out of the exhaust stack in a thick column that rose 20 feet into the air and drifted across the parking lot like a prairie fire. The tachometer climbed, and 1,800 RPM, 2,000, 2,200. The noise was unbelievable. The kind of sound that rattles your chest and makes you feel it in your teeth. Dale held the throttle wide open. The dyno computer flashed numbers across the screen. Torque, RPM, load, and then after 10 seconds, Kurt waved his hand. Dale backed off the throttle. The engine settled into an idle. The smoke cleared. Kurt walked over to the computer, stared at the screen, frowned. Then he looked at Dale. "You need to see this." Dale climbed down, walked over, looked at the screen. 387 horsepower. The crowd went silent. Someone in the back said, "No way." Kurt ran the numbers again, double-checked the calibration, pulled up the torque curve in the power band graph. 387 horsepower. Peak torque at 1,650 RPM. No dips, no surges, just a flat, brutal curve that climbed from idle to redline without hesitation. One of the younger farmers walked up, looked at the screen, looked at Dale. "That's 120 more than the factory rating." Dale nodded. "I know." "How?" Dale shrugged. "It's a Perkins." The guy shook his head, walked away. Kurt printed the dyno sheet, handed it to Dale. "You've got the second highest number of the day." Dale folded the paper, put it in his shirt pocket. "Appreciate it, Kurt." He walked back to the 4880, fired it up, rolled off the dyno, and that's when a man in a white Stetson and ostrich skin boots stepped in front of him. His name was Gil Rafferty, and he was a vintage tractor collector from Amarillo, Texas. Gil had been standing in the back of the crowd during Dale's dyno pull, and when the numbers came up on the screen, he'd pulled out his phone and started doing research. Massey Ferguson 4880, V8 Perkins, factory horsepower 267, current resale value for a clean low-hour example, $22,000 to $28,000. But this wasn't a clean example. This was a worn-out, beat-up, rust-covered field tractor that just proved it had more horsepower than most brand-new machines rolling off the assembly line, and Gil wanted it. "Excuse me," Gil said, stepping up to the 4880. "You got a minute?" Dale idled the engine down. "What do you need?" "I want to buy your tractor." Dale blinked. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale." "Not this." Gil pulled a checkbook out of his jacket pocket, clicked a pen. "I'll give you 20,000. Dale stared at him. "You serious?" "Dead serious." "For this?" "For that engine." Dale looked at the 4880, the rust, the missing cab, the baling wire. "You know it doesn't have a cab, right?" "Don't care." "The paint's gone." "Don't care." "The front tires don't match." Gil smiled. "I'll give you 25. Dale felt something tighten in his chest. $25,000 for a tractor that a John Deere dealership had called scrap metal 6 weeks ago. "I need to think about it," Dale said. Gil nodded, wrote his phone number on the back of a business card, and handed it to Dale. "You think about it, but don't think too long. I've got 3 other Perkins builds I'm working on, and that V8 of yours just became the crown jewel." He tipped his hat, walked away. Dale sat there on the 4880, staring at the business card in his hand, while the crowd started to break up and the next tractor rolled onto the dyno. Dale didn't call Gil that day. He didn't call him the next day either. Instead, Dale drove home, parked the 4880 in the machine shed, and stood there in the doorway for an hour, staring at it in the dim light. $25,000. It was more money than Dale had ever been offered for a piece of equipment. Hell, it was more money than he'd cleared in profit the last 2 growing seasons combined. But it wasn't about the money. It was about what that tractor represented. His father had bought that machine with cash, had driven it through 2 decades of Kansas weather without a single blown engine or a single missed payment, had taught Dale how to run a clutch, how to time an injection pump, how to read black smoke and know when you were pushing too hard. And now some collector from Texas wanted to take it to a museum. Dale pulled out his phone, opened his text messages, scrolled down to his daughter's name, Emily Brenner. 29 years old, living in Wichita, working as a loan officer at a credit union. Dale hadn't talked to her in 3 months, not because they'd fought, just because they didn't have much to say to each other anymore. But he typed a message anyway. Got offered $25K for the 4880 today. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a response. Dad, take it, please. Dale stared at the screen. You've been running that tractor since I was in high school. You deserve something newer. Dale typed back. It still runs fine. Dad, it doesn't have a cab. Don't need one. You're 61 years old. Dale put the phone back in his pocket. He called Gil Rafferty the next morning. I'll take 30, Dale said. There was a pause on the other end, then a laugh. You're pushing it, Brenner. You saw the dyno sheet. I did. You saw the torque curve. I did. Then you know what that engine's worth. Another pause. Then, 28, final offer. Dale looked out the kitchen window at the 4880 sitting in the machine shed. The morning sun was hitting the fenders, and for just a moment the rust looked almost red again. Deal, Dale said. I'll be there Friday with a trailer. I'll have it ready. Dale hung up, sat down at the kitchen table, stared at his coffee cup. $28,000 for scrap metal. Gil Rafferty showed up on Friday afternoon with a 40-foot gooseneck and a crew of 2 guys in matching Carhartt jackets. Dale had the 4880 running when they arrived. He'd spent the last 3 days cleaning it, not restoring it, just cleaning it. Scraped the mud off the fenders, wiped down the engine, greased the pins. He didn't fix the paint, didn't replace the cab, didn't touch the baling wire on the exhaust stack. He just made sure it ran. Gil climbed out of his truck, walked over to the 4880, and stood there for a long moment, listening to the engine idle. She sounds good, Gil said. Dale nodded. She always has. You change your mind yet? No. Gil smiled, pulled out a cashier's check, handed it to Dale. $28,000, drawn on a bank in Amarillo. Dale folded the check, put it in his shirt pocket. You want to load her up? Dale asked. In a minute. Gil walked around the 4880, ran his hand along the fender, looked at the V8 Perkins like he was studying a piece of art. You know what this is, don't you? Dale didn't answer. This is the last generation of tractors that were built to be rebuilt. No computers, no emissions, no software updates, just iron and fuel and a man who knows what he's doing. Gil looked at Dale. Your father knew what he was doing. Dale's throat tightened. Yeah, he did. And so do you. Dale didn't say anything. Gil's crew loaded the 4880 onto the trailer, strapped it down, checked the chains twice, and then they were gone. Dale stood in the driveway, watching the trailer disappear down the county road, and for the first time in 40 years, the machine shed felt empty. 3 weeks later, Dale walked into the John Deere dealership in Hutchinson. The same salesman was standing outside, same clipboard, same coffee cup. He saw Dale coming and smiled. Back again? Dale nodded. I'm here to buy. The salesman's smile faded. Buy what? An 8R. The salesman blinked, looked past Dale toward the parking lot. Where's the 4880? Sold it. To who? A collector. The salesman laughed. A collector? For what? Dale pulled the cashier's check out of his wallet. It was a copy. He'd already deposited the original. But he unfolded it and held it up so the salesman could see the amount. $28,000. The salesman's face went pale. For scrap metal, Dale said. He walked past the salesman, through the front door, straight to the desk where they kept the financing paperwork. 2 hours later, Dale drove off the lot in a 2018 John Deere 8R with 490 hours, a leather seat, and a factory warranty. It was the nicest tractor he'd ever owned. But every time he looked at it, he thought about the 4880. Gil Rafferty called Dale 6 months later. Thought you'd want to know, Gil said. I took the 4880 to a tractor show in Oklahoma City last weekend. Yeah? Had it on display next to a 76 4880 that's been fully restored. Paint, chrome, new decals, the whole deal. How'd it do? Gil laughed. Yours got more attention. Why? Because it looks like it's been used. People don't want to see a museum piece. They want to see a machine that worked. And when I told them about the dyno numbers, they didn't believe me. So I showed them the sheet. Dale smiled. What'd they say? They said your father raised you right. Dale's chest tightened. Anyway, Gil said, I wanted to say thank you. That Perkins V8 is the centerpiece of my collection now, and every time someone asks about it, I tell them the same thing. What's that? I tell them it came from a man who knew the difference between scrap metal and a legend. Gil hung up. Dale sat in his kitchen, staring at the phone, and for the first time since his father died, he felt like he'd done something right. The John Deere 8R is still sitting in Dale's machine shed. It's got 1,200 hours on it now. It runs clean, it shifts smooth, it's never broken down. But sometimes late at night, when the wind blows hard enough to rattle the shed doors, Dale thinks about the 4880. He thinks about his father driving it home in a thunderstorm. He thinks about the dyno numbers. He thinks about the way that Perkins V8 used to shake the fenders when it idled. And he thinks about the salesman who called it scrap metal. That salesman still works at the dealership in Hutchinson. Dale sees him sometimes when he goes in for parts. The guy never brings up the 4880, and Dale never reminds him. He doesn't need to. Because the dyno sheet is framed on the wall of Dale's shop, right next to a photo of his father standing on the fender of that same tractor in 1983. 387 horsepower. Scrap metal. The difference is knowing what you're looking at.